Welcome back, dear listeners, to AIbiz, the go to podcast for the founders and the leaders who want real growth, real leverage, and real talk about what actually works in a tech driven world. I'm your host, Avik, and today we are unpacking a shift that so many service based founders secretly dream about, like moving from reactive, custom, client fired reels to something calmer, clearer, and actually scalable. So, our guest today, dear listeners, please welcome Dylan Bost. So, welcome to the show.
Hi there. Thank you so much.
Amazing. So, dear listeners, before we delve deep into the discussion today, I'll quickly love to introduce you with Dylan. So, Dylan has lived that entire arc. He ran a successful creative agency for over a decade. On paper, it was meaning. In reality, it was the classic founder hamster wheel, subjective deliverables, constant context switchings, and systems that took more energy than they gave back. So instead of tapping out, he used the pain as data. He reinvented the whole model. And he is now the founder of Sunny HQ, a human first WordPress hosting and support company that takes the entire website headache off a business owner's plate. So they can focus on the thing that actually grows the business. No bots, no chaos, real people and real support. So, on top of that, he's writing The Seven Mirrors, a book about how memory, leadership, and business intersect, and how clarity becomes a tool for transformation. So, this is not just a kind of tech story, um, this is a founder nervous system story. And if you have ever thought, I love what I do, but the space is not sustainable, or kind of like I want my business to grow without my calendar dying in the process, then this episode is basically a mirror with your name on it. So I'll not take much of your time. Let's get started. Welcome to the show again.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's a great intro. I loved it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And so Dylan, if you can take us back to peak agency life, like from the outside, it looked successful. From the inside, uh, what were the early warning signs that your model was not just stressful, but structurally broken?
Yeah, I think so. We all, I think, kind of suffer from this, and I think that the foundation is, it's an internal thing, right? But the foundation is unfortunately culturally for us in the U.S., right? It's a driven, it's a driven culture, right? We're in school at 5 and parents are planning, where their kids are going to college. And so that leaks into, us as children and, no matter what version, that's one end of an extreme. Obviously, there's a lot of variability out there, um but I think that, we all, start asking ourselves questions that are out of alignment early. And what that means to me is that, we start to ask ourselves, you know, what does the world expect from us instead of what do we want to give to the world? And that manifests itself in ways like, choosing paths for money or for success driven and not necessarily with what we like. And this is a cliche, right? I think if you can't turn on television now without seeing some story of of someone in their teens who's fighting with their parents and whatever version of that is. So for me, what that looked like is, I had great parents and they always encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to do. But if I really look back, and I have this wonderful benefit of looking back now and saying, well, you know what? It's not that I didn't necessarily wanna do so. For instance, I got, my education was all in design and architecture, and then that led me into computers and computer modeling, and then, essentially then into marketing and advertising and branding. So that's a pretty wild curve of a path, right? And it's not that I was being pushed to do any one thing, but I didn't really start to ask myself, what do I want? Right. I looked at, what does my dad do? And what do the people around me do? And that looks kind of fun. So what I tell people a lot, right now when we talk about the subject is be okay with a pivot, right? Be okay with changing. And I'm 55 now, and the reality is you can live 4 lifetimes in that amount of time. You don't need to. This isn't, our parents and our grandparents. You don't need to pick a profession and move in that profession until you're, 65 years old and retire and follow your pension. If you want to, that's great. But be okay with if you start to feel out of alignment. And that's the easiest way to put this is if you feel like there's something that you're missing every day, if you want more, but you can't figure out what it is. And I think that, that's what it was for me. So if we think about that time when I was running this agency, let's 25 employees, a lot of success, awards, fantastic customers, and honestly, it was fun day to day, a lot of fun. But I started to ask myself, what am I giving to the world? Like what and here's what happened as entrepreneurs and business owners, right? The thing that we get into business for is not what we end up doing, right? So I enjoyed design. I enjoyed the day-to-day working with customers, but all of a sudden I'm running the business. And so and that's just part of it. That's where you kind of shift over into now I'm managing people and making business decisions. And yes, I'm still doing some sales and things, but the reality was I started to say, well, this is really out of alignment with what I want. And then I had to start asking myself, what do I want? And I think that's an important question to really sit with and pursue.
Exactly. So, I mean, uh, was there kind of one specific moment or maybe the client situation where you thought that if I keep running the business like this, I'm going to burn it to the ground or burn myself out of completely? So,
Well, yeah, and I mean, unfortunately, and I don't recommend this path. That's exactly what I did. I avoided those questions. I knew they were there, and then 2008 happened. We were pretty insulated and kind of recession proof, but then that happened, and we had about 30% of our business was in real estate and development, and we just had clients walk away with huge bills. And just as a side note on the personal side, I started drinking, had some addiction problems, and on the outside, no one knew it, right? But on the inside, I was melting, and it started with those questions of just, not reaching for help, and that's on the personal side, but in business, I think that we all get in, especially entrepreneurs, right? We get into these positions, as an entrepreneur, you don't know what you're doing. I mean, that's the reality. That's what's fun about the business, right? We get into this as as puzzle solvers. We're going to figure out the best way to achieve this thing and plug in these employees and these vendors and all of these, widgets and all these things and make this thing soar. But we also have to realize when we can't do something or when we don't know the answers to reach out and ask, and to do that early, whether that's about a business growth or even, and this is the embarrassing thing, I think, right? When things start to not work, we think we're supposed to know better. We're supposed to be able to handle all these things. And that's not fair. I mean, that's assuming that we all can do everything. And so I think it's important, to what I tell a lot of young business owners is, reach out, use your network, develop good mentor systems, always be learning, and learning about the business, not just about what you do. So if you have a brand agency or if you develop computers or you build cars, look at all of the things that you need in order to to develop that side of the business, not just those things that are inherent to the business itself.
exactly. So, like, Yeah, I mean, that definitely resonates with so many founders. And it is really one huge kind of, I'd say, explosion. I mean,
Hmm.
it is this kind of, what to say, like, that a steady trip of misaligned work and the constant urgency, right? So, and like you moved from a creative agency with subjective deliverables to a support and hosting company with very clear outcomes. So, what were the key mental shifts that you had to make to move from the uh, custom service mode to the scalable one? I mean, the repeatable value.
Yeah, yeah. So it started with I had this really fantastic mentor while I was running the agency, and he said, "Dylan, two things you need to do. You need to find something in your business, in your agency, some recurring thing that you can sell so that the business value is more than your time, right? And then another thing is develop all the business, the standard operating procedures, all the business protocols in documentation form so you start to build IP around the how you do things. So when I, took time in between, so when we closed down the agency and I was really thinking about, what I want to do, it started with developing an idea and it was very different. I started to ask myself, what do I want for my life? Not just what do I want to do? And obviously, I chose from a tool set that was close to me. So I looked at the things that I had done, but I looked at designing my life instead of designing a job or instead of, starting a business. And so what that meant is, and I think you put it a beautiful way of not letting your calendar get away from you. I think it's I looked at I don't want to I've worked 12 hours a day now for 10 years. I don't want to do that anymore. I missed out on raising two of the three kids that I had. For the most part, I was there, but not really. And so I wanted more time for my family. I also looked at what type of involvement do I want to have with customers? And fortunately, a part of our business in the agency, we were already doing some web hosting. We, as a natural part, as agencies grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, and it still is this case. A lot of design agencies, they end up hosting because it's hard to find someone that they can find that will match their level of service. And so we had developed this good hosting business and I started to think about it and I thought, huh, so on one side of this design business, everything is subjective, meaning, when we ran the agency, um, let's say you're going to do a website and a brand and messaging and advertising. Well, each of those creative projects it's subjective, right? We're gonna say this is what we're going to do, but you have a number of iterations, and yes, that's part of the fun. But I was done with that. I said, okay,
Right.
I don't necessarily want to build a widget. I'm really good at customer service. And I know I can teach that skill. And so I looked at it and I thought, well, here's this side of our business that, we were probably doing, I don't know, 150, $200,000 a year, or maybe more, in just hosting. And I thought, well, that's pretty cool because that just kind of runs itself. We're there taking care of everything,
Right.
but with website hosting, and even the top end of what we do kind of really full service white glove hosting, which means we're there to manage every technical aspect of our clients' websites. The cool thing is it either works or it doesn't, right? There's no question. There's no like, well, I kind of want it to work this way. Well, I mean, it's like a light switch. And that's what's beautiful about it. So that, that helped me. And then I simply, I started down the path of doing it. I'm a big do it myself person. So I for about 6 months, I started to use the existing customers that I had, and in the before scenario, I had about 5 to 6 people that took care of the server environment and everything, and I was able to through converting all those sites to WordPress and focusing on WordPress because WordPress has a specific kind of platform and way of programming. It's more controlled, right? We're not trying to host 50 different or even 4 different types of environments. So we could develop a really fast WordPress, energized, optimized platform. And then we know that the websites always work. We run a really kind of high availability environment. And I found that solved 90% of the problems that would happen, would come up with WordPress websites. And then on top of that, we were managing support requests, and that comes in a lot of different fashions. But I found that I could, manage 50, 100, maybe even 150 customers on my own.
Okay.
And that told me a lot, right? That told me, well, if I can do that on my own and, and not be working 12 hours a day, then we can scale that. And so that enabled me to really develop this idea for this business that I knew I could plug, people in and we could scale it really quickly.
Exactly. Hmm. So, like, if a founder is listening in that miss a middle, doing client work that is all over the map, then what is the first filter you would give them to identify what could be productized or maybe turned into a system? So, what is it?
Well, yeah, I think one is don't try to be everything for everybody, right? I think in looking at to me, even maybe before you get to what are the recurring things are, is looking at the services that you provide and evaluating those and saying, okay, out of all these services, what are the bottom five and what are the top five?
Mm.
And then really starting to be really great at fewer things. Look, there's plenty of business out there. This is something that I did not understand in my first go around. We were always out there, quote unquote, fighting for business, and in reality, there are millions of companies out there. Yes, you do have to get your message out, and you do have to work for it, but it's not like there's this. It's not like there's this finite amount of companies. I mean, the new companies are always happening. People are always needing to change, and so no matter what people are doing for a business, there's plenty of customers. But it's about really becoming great at to me a smaller slice of things. And then looking for opportunities, and I think they're everywhere. I think there's very few businesses that you can't, when you look at, well, in fact, I mean, a good example of this, I've got a family member who runs a business doing kind of air condition, like light air conditioning system work.
Mhm.
Mostly it's cleaning, but their biggest business is in a subscription service for the filters, right? So instead of just, on one side, you could say, well, I sell air conditioners. Well, you can sell air conditioners, but then you can also sell this subscription where 4 times a year we come out and clean everything and replace the filters. And then you've developed the whole side of the business that even if you sold less air conditioners, you would always have that working. So I think it's really getting down and looking at where are the things that maybe they're not, reoccurring right now, or you don't think about them in that way, but kind of slicing it and looking into it and saying, oh, well, this might make sense.
Exactly. Exactly true. Oh, lovely. And you have 30 years in the digital systems and you are now writing the 7 mirrors. So when you look at the founders today, um, what is the biggest mindset gap between I run a busy service shop and I operate a scalable impact engine? So what do you have to say?
I think a big one for me is always look at things from your customer or your client's point of view. So really get down to, and that can start with asking your customers or clients if you don't do that regularly. But I think a big point is, and we always do this. We're constantly asking how, even in support requests, right? Where how could we be better, or did you understand that? Um, it's important because as things change, we need to understand what our clients, what our customers think about the service, what they want. Heck, reaching out to their clients and asking if we could do one thing better, or if there's one thing that we don't do that you think we should do, ask them. I mean, I think there's a world that can come from, you know, from your top 10 customers or top 100 customers. Reach out to those folks.
Correct. That's great. And any suggestions you have to give to the listeners today?
Just I think I'm a big believer in a lot of internal work. So, as you mentioned, I'm writing a book, Seven Mirrors.
Right. Great. And that's really a great discussion, I'd say, Dylan. So, dear listeners, if you are listening and maybe feeling a little called out by the word burnout, then this is your data point and not your shame point.